Okay, we are live.
We are reconvening our afternoon meeting on and shifting gears to back to the budget and hearing from the Fish and Wildlife Department, and want to express my gratitude for your flexibility and willingness to be back here with us this afternoon, interim commissioner. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Andrea Shortsleeve. I am the current Commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. With me, I have Elizabeth Stratton, who is the Director of our Business Office at Fish and Wildlife, and then also Steve Gomez, who is, you heard from him earlier, I think, and he's the Business Director for the Agency of Natural Resources. And as you may know, I have been a biologist with the department for 8 years, commissioner for about 2.5 months. So there's a lot specifically with the budget that I am learning, and have these fine folks to help me answer questions. So thank you. Knowing that we have a short time today, I will just kind of breeze through a department overview and then hit on some key budget changes and talk about our financial restructuring idea going forward. The Department of the mission, or the mission of our department is the conservation of all fish, wildlife, plant, and species in Vermont and the habitat for the people of Vermont. Other challenges that we address are providing quality fish and wildlife-based recreation opportunities and reaching Vermonters with the best possible information about these resources. And it's a big mission. We take it very seriously, and I have a really great, capable, knowledgeable, passionate staff. You've met some of them already. That I'm very proud of the work we do and proud of the people that I work with. Many people are surprised to learn, you all heard from Dr. Renfrew last week about all of the different species that we manage here in Vermont, but many people are surprised to learn that we are responsible for all living things, from bugs to bobcats, mud puppies to maple trees, and all of the habitats that they are required for their survival and thriving. As Dr. Renfrew mentioned last week, there's at least 24,000 different species in Vermont, and our department is responsible for managing all of them. We are also responsible and serve all Vermonters, from hunters and anglers to people who just like to look at wildlife, and those who just like to know that the wildlife's out there roaming around the woods and the mountains. We work closely with towns and communities, and we also provide direct assistance to landowners who would like to improve habitat on their property. We take our commitment to future generations very seriously. We work to ensure that we have healthy and thriving wildlife populations for future generations here in the state. So I'll just take a minute to talk about the responsibilities of each division within our organization. We currently have a little over 140 full-time employees. 41 of those employees are within our warden service. The division that Elizabeth is the director for, our administration and business division, provides the policy and planning and personnel and financial management for our department. They're also responsible for the distribution and the sale of all of our hunting licenses, and they manage $9 million in federal grant dollars annually. Our wildlife division is responsible for the conservation management of wildlife and plant species and their habitats. This ranges from managing the deer and moose populations to dealing with bear and human wildlife conflicts to preventing biodiversity loss, as you heard last week about our state wildlife action plan. The wildlife division also manages over 135,000 acres of land on our wildlife management areas, and we help FPR, Forest Parks and Recreation, manage their state forests as well. Our fish division is responsible for the conservation and management of all fish species and their aquatic habitats. They're also responsible for the rearing and stocking of several fish species, trout, walleye, some other species, for recreation opportunities and for restoration opportunities as well. They monitor fish health and manage all of our state-owned riparian areas. Our warden service is primarily responsible for enforcing fish and wildlife conservation laws, but the breadth of their work is ever expanding, and they are currently responsible for managing all animal cruelty cases in the state. They provide search and rescue services. They take the lead role in recreational boating safety, and then they support the Vermont State Police on all major crimes by providing investigation skills and our highly specialized trained canines as well.
Do you remind us how many wardens there are?
41. Yep. And finally, our outreach division provides all of our information and formal education programs. They do all of our publications, do all of our promotional materials, social media, which, as you can imagine, takes quite a breadth of time managing that. They also provide award-winning hunter ed and conservation education programs to Vermonters. Primarily, one of those is our Green Mountain Conservation Camps, which serves 900 youth every year. A really great program. So,
Representative Bartholomew.
You said the wardens do animal abuse cases. Does
correct.
that include domestic animals?
Yes, that's primarily what it is.
So
Yeah.
is that transferring public safety when that department is up?
That has not been discussed yet. Currently, it is sitting with the wardens, much to their chagrin.
Did we add a position or something? I thought we did add some
I think
capacity.
there was one position added, and it was kind of at a director level. You're talking about the animal welfare, yeah. So there's one position that was created to start building a program for that, but currently all of the response is within the warden service.
Oh, okay. We didn't add a warden to that. We added a different position.
Did we add? Oh, we did. Okay,
Yeah, I thought
excuse me.
so.
Thank you. Yeah, we did add one warden to help address those issues. So diving into our budget, we want to just look at how the budget is broken up by program. Our state fiscal year 26 budget is just shy of $31.3 million. This is a net increase of $1 million from last year. Just wanted to say we're not proposing any new initiatives this session. This budget maintains our current service levels. And looking at this kind of diagram, it's clear that our fish division takes the majority of our budget, but it should be said that our fish culture program within that division uses about 4.6 million. Their budget is about 4.6. So just moving to look at our budget overview by fund. Our federal funds total about $10 million every year. 91% of those federal funds come from Pittman Robinson and Dingell Johnson funds, which are excise taxes on firearms, ammunition, archery equipment, and fishing equipment. 6% of our federal funding comes from state wildlife grants that are appropriated annually to address wildlife conservation needs. State Wildlife Action Plan is an example of that. And the remainder of our federal funds come through the EPA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, funding for threatened and endangered species, and Clean Vessel Act. Our federal funds support a large majority of our staff costs. So a reduction in federal funding would result in our inability to pay our staff if funding is not replaced. And our federal funds also support subgrants to our state partners that help support the department mission. And oftentimes these partners will help bring in non-federal match to, they bring the non-federal match requirement, and the work that they do is critical to address some capacity issues by our department staff. We get our general funds, our budget includes $9.38 million from the general fund, and that is a 11.7% increase since last year. And then our special funds, which include our Fish and Wildlife Fund, shown on the diagram, which is where our license fees are located, is another third of our budget, and that's another $10 million. So if we shift over to the pie chart on the right, looking at our budget by expense, it's pretty clear that the majority of our expenses are found within salaries and benefits to our staff. It's almost 70% of our budget. Our internal service funds, which insurance, workman's comp, HR, Agency of Digital Service allocation, that all accounts for another 8%. And so kind of the take-home message of that pie chart is that within our expenses, that our operating budget, which we have, is the only place that we really have any discretion over, is only about 14% of our budget. And so any cuts in expense will either result in cutting staff or eliminating major portions of our department. Just to walk through some key expenditure changes this fiscal year. We've had an increase in 1.39 million in salaries and benefit costs across all funding, and that's a result of increases cost of living, insurance cost increases, and then RFRs.
It's an RFR.
A reclassification. What does RFR stand for?
Request for reclassification or the HR process if people think their job duties have expanded beyond their current position.
Thank you. And then, an $84,000 increase in our internal service fund costs and our ADS, so the Agency of Digital Services, our service level agreement. We have eliminated $175,000 in dispatching fees from the Department of Public Safety, and that corresponding change is made within their budget as well. That associated revenue has been removed from their budget. After the July 2023 storm, our annex building in Berlin was flooded. We had a lot of storage there, and so the department had to secure a new storage space in East Barry. And using general fund dollars from the Secretary's office, we were able to secure that. So that just resulted in a neutral net transfer within the agency. We're expecting a vacancy savings in our fish division. We have several employees who are close to retirement. And so within the next year, we expect to realize some vacancy savings there. Revenue changes. We are seeing stagnant to decreasing license revenue, motor fuel revenue, and then timber sale revenue. Our license sales are expected to decline by $200,000 this year. Motor fuel receipts reduced by $30,000, and then timber sale receipts have been reduced to $73,000. And this is due to staff capacity and a lack of long-range management plans to help implement the timber sale process, excuse me. This year, we will also be utilizing receipts from our Fish and Wildlife Trust Fund, which is a fund that was created in 1995 with the receipts of our lifetime licenses. And so this year we'll be able to use a balance. The balance is sufficient enough, and we'll be utilizing $225,000 from that fund. And then we were given, in addition to the $1 million, we were increase that we saw in the general fund. We were also given $140,000 from the Secretary's office and a one-time general fund allocation of $185,000 to bridge the gap in our budget this year. Looking at position changes, we were able to transfer a position from fish culture supervisor position in the Salisbury hatchery to create a land acquisition assistant position using state funds and dedicated funds focused on land conservation. And this person focuses on wetland conservation and restoration activities around initiatives, around Lake Champlain and Memphremagog. And the wardens have gone through a statewide law enforcement RFR, so a reclassification for all law enforcement personnel in the state. And while that's not in our base budget, it will insert a base pressure going forward to be aware of. Recognizing the time, I just want to touch briefly on some significant challenges that the department is facing. I know Secretary Moore discussed some of these earlier today, and I just want to say that the Act 59 and Act 181, really important laws that were put forth, but is also putting an extensive pressure on our staff requirements that the work that our staff is required to do, both in providing expertise in planning and developing criteria for both of these new laws, the long-term management of areas that are conserved, and the requirements that are associated with ongoing technical support for the Act 250 process. We'll be placing significant challenges on our staff capacity. And just, I guess, moving forward, we are undertaking a large financial restructuring. It's very clear to us that the business model that our department works under is no longer most likely sustainable going forward. The conservation work that we are being asked to do is becoming more and more, and we're having fewer and fewer people pay into the system to help support that work. And so this year, our department is looking at all of our long-term capital investment needs. We're looking at all of our funded and unfunded mandates of work that we need to do. And then we are also looking at funding models from other state conservation agencies, other state agencies and how they are funding their conservation work. So we can perhaps adopt new structures in the future. So that is a large piece of the work that we're doing this year and hope to address challenges in the future. So I'll leave that, know that you have a full schedule. So just want to make sure we have time for any questions quickly.
Do we have your budget development spreadsheet?
I think-
It's not here, but is it in?
It should be
yours?
in the document that
Oh, additional, you gave us two. Got it. Great. The budget, oops, that's wrong. Budget book final. Got it. Great. I was kind of hoping you might have ideas for addressing the funding gap. Now, it's something we've been aware of for a very long time. And I guess I'm curious what the time frame is and what ideas you're looking at.
Yeah, time frame. I can't commit to a time frame, but I know it's like within this year that we want to address this. We are looking at other state models. So places like Minnesota and Missouri use a percentage of a sales tax that to fund all of their conservation work. So looking at a model like that. I know that Texas has a model that's kind of informally called a backpack tax. So a similar excise tax on outdoor recreation equipment that would be comparable to Pittman Robinson excise tax. And just some other models and other ideas that have been put out within our state in the past that just haven't been used at that time.
When fish and wildlife wardens are used to support the state police, is there any compensation that comes back to the department?
It's a good question. Do you know that? You don't know the answer, or you don't? No funding comes back to the state, yes, or to the wildlife.
And then one more, and then I'll. So, to your knowledge, the federal excise tax revenues. I mean, I know they've been a solid source of revenue for all the fish and wildlife departments historically. Are they fairly well insulated from uncertainty?
From what I understand, yes. Knowing that reading the tea leaves is very hard, but the way that it's been explained to me, and perhaps one of these folks can jump in if I misspeak, but although this money is coming from a federal agency, it's viewed as belonging to the state. And so it, I think, is not as subject to some of the other federal funding cuts. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, so both the Pittman Robertson and the Dingle Johnson funds, so one for wildlife restoration, one for sport fish restoration, those are permanent authorizations through Congress. So if you're looking on a scale of risk in terms of federal funding, like those are probably among the safest sources that states could depend on in terms of not being reverted or rescinded or anything like that. So,
But they're very much earmarked. It sounds like, so I guess if it's like from fishing gear, that's why part of why our fishing program is pretty big probably. Because it's funded with that earmark.
correct, yeah. So both the wildlife restoration and the sport fish restoration, they have very, very specific dedicated revenues that they draw from, and then there's specific expenditures that are allowed from those accounts. So especially with the sport fish restoration one, that's a little bit more focused in terms of where those expenditures can be. But like for example, wildlife restoration, that applies to all mammals and birds. So like the department can use that for bats and things like that. So it may not be like a one-to-one in terms of like people hunting versus like where the conservation dollars go. So it's a little bit more broad because of the way the language was authorized through Congress.
And is one of them significantly larger than the other?
Yes, PR is larger than the DJ funds.
So Pittman Robertson, the wildlife restoration dollars are larger than the other one.
Right. Representative Pritchard.
Yeah, I'm interested in what some of those unfunded mandates are, because I know that department has taken on a credible amount of stuff that I feel is out of their AOR.
Yeah.
And it takes up resources.
Mhm.
So I'd just like to know what those things are.
Yeah, well, currently, I mean, Act 59 and Act 181 were both unfunded. And given work was given to our department to meet those. We have ongoing Act 250 obligations of, right, doing the regulatory work, and that is not funded, and that all of this at least adds up to about 4 full-time employee staff time that's not being funded.
It would be helpful to get a breakdown of that.
Sure.
One of the things you mentioned was that management of acquired properties, which certainly hasn't happened under Act 59 yet. If you're acquiring properties, I'm glad you are, but it's not because of Act 59 yet.
No.
So I want to be clear about
Yep.
that statement and how much you're really talking about.
Well, and I think the time that is being spent in Act 59 right now is doing the inventory and the planning. And then looking ahead, we know that the management of those conservation areas will be required.
Assuming Fish and Wildlife has some of them. I mean, you have a separate conservation program now, and you are acquiring lands now.
Yeah.
Represent Chapin and then Logan.
Thanks so much for this overview. It's helpful. I wanted to just ask, related to that exact question around unfunded mandates or unfunded activities. You have disaster recovery and response on your significant initiatives and challenges. We didn't speak to that at length. I'd love to hear more about it, and I'd really love to understand, because this is something, across all kinds of departments and agencies and state government, we've witnessed significantly more disasters or more costly disasters in the last few years and more frequent, and we anticipate that. So I guess I just really love to understand how that impacts your budget.
Yeah, so the disaster recovery and response, we've had infrastructure damage from the July 2023 flood, July 2024, and the December 2024 weather events. And so that's included flooded access areas and roads to our WMAs. We've lost a lot of content at our Salisbury Fish Hatchery. The entire basement flooded. And then our annex storage flooded down on Dog River Road and in Berlin. And so all of that, we're working with FEMA for mitigation money. And I think looking at the long term, like those events will continue to happen. I'm assuming how that will impact our work moving forward will be probably dictated by the government.
So partly, I guess what I'm interested in is understanding on a fiscal management perspective, how you track that, or do you track it?
Do we track that?
Yes, yes, we do.
Are you able to share some figures from this past fiscal year or the previous fiscal year?
So are you asking for the damage amounts and where the money's coming from for repairs? Is that what you're asking? Or
I guess the way I think of it is plan for a future fiscal year. Maybe for planning, maybe in your budget, you have a line item for unanticipated losses or unanticipated work to reconstruct areas that are hard hit. I don't know if you're planning for it in advance and have a line item in your budget, or if when you do your actuals for the year, you're identifying, we spent this much money that we didn't anticipate spending in the budget. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand how and I'm not aiming this just at your department. I'm just asking the question now, maybe more appropriate A&R wide, how that gets tracked, if at all, and thus like how we can learn what that's costing your department and your agency is I imagine it's potentially significant, and I would just love to understand that.
Yeah, we can get information on that, I suppose.
I would say that we don't budget for a disaster that hasn't happened. We don't project that out. So that's one piece of it. And I lost the rest of my thought. I apologize.
So looking back, are you, if you, I heard you say you are tracking it, so I'm wondering,
Yes.
so then can you look back and share, are you able to say, this is how it affected our budget last year?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of FEMA funds tied up in that, so the pressure on our budget is actually small. But yes, absolutely.
But you might say that, this much, but then we expect, I don't know, 90% or maybe more to be covered by FEMA.
Right, and one thing that we can do and probably does happen in the with field staff is they can identify areas on our WMA roads, for example, where, if we in our regular course of maintenance can upgrade a culvert, for example, then they would do things like that. We have capital funds for that kind of work. So in terms of trying to anticipate things that may happen, they are doing that kind of work, but not to the level of where we can only go so far, I guess, is what I'm saying, to anticipate.
Yeah, I wasn't really asking about planning ahead. I'm asking about tracking your budget, understanding the impacts to your budget. That'd be great. Anything you can provide, thanks.
Representative Logan.
Just reiterating what you asked for, a little bit more detail about the expenses and activities related to Act 250 or Act 181 and Act 59 would be really helpful.
Great.
I'd say on all four of those budgets. I mean,
Yeah.
it says significant initiatives and challenges. It'd be great to quantify all four.
Yeah, good question. Just following up on what you asked about Rep. Shapen, are those kinds of costs covered in the capital budget primarily rather than the part of the department budget that we comment on?
Yeah, I can take that since that's kind of an agency, it's at the agency level because it impacts all departments. So the funding is very complicated because it can include FEMA funds, it can include insurance funds, it can include capital funds. Also, sometimes when there's match requirements, there may be an appropriation from the agency administration to cover those match funds. And sometimes departments may use special funds to cover part or all of the matching share. So it's quite the funding stack that goes into the disaster recovery and response work. So
No easy answer.
Representative, Labor and then North.
Thank you. RP revenues, Federal Department of Interior, they used to be 17% tax on the purchaser.
Mhm.
Well, you didn't see it, it was built into the price. Has that fee or interest rate been changed? Has it gone up or gone down?
I don't know. I don't know. Do you know, Steve?
I don't off the top of my head, no, the excise tax.
Yeah. But we can look into it.
Yes, you mentioned earlier, timber sales revenue declined and that there might have been some reasons for that. I'm wondering how much they decline and what are the reasons and can we change that?
Sure. I think our timber sale projection is projected to decline by $73,000. Part of the reason is there's a lack of staff capacity in the areas that need the timber sales to be done. So like in the Northeast Kingdom, like our St. Johnsbury district, there are not as many foresters as there used to be for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation.
Not a matter of doing the cutting and the logging, it's a matter of the forest management plan.
Yeah,
Sure.
so one part is like we don't have the people to lay out the forest, the forest management activities, the timber sales. We also don't have long range management plans for several of our areas. And we need to have those in place before we can do any timber sales.
Does that sound like a kind of a self-funding project then? Maybe even a source of revenue if you get that problem fixed?
It would be a source of revenue if we had increased staff capacity to develop those plans. Yes.
What's the total revenue from timber sale?
Currently it's zero.
It varies, in state fiscal year 25, I believe it was $122,000, but it really varies each year.
And that's just for fish and wildlife properties. Further questions? Representative Sakowicz.
Yeah, following up on Representative Nort's question, you said that there would be revenue from the sales, but but there would be corresponding costs that would be the labor that would be required to do the plans and
Mhm.
a sense of what the balance is between and the revenue there.
That's a good question. I am wondering, do you know off the top of your head? No, like, yeah, yeah, I don't know what the cost to benefit of those sales are, if that revenue is the net revenue. But we can get more information on it, so.
Members, further questions? Thank you again for coming in.
Of course. Yeah, nice to see you all.
So we have to get our budget letter, the appropriations coming by this coming Wednesday. So we need to make a plan for that. Thoughts from our budget group, like in the past, we have, sort of budget letters we've sent in the past. But we need to make recommendations to the appropriations committee based on the information that we've learned about the budget so far. Any thoughts that folks have about either what you've heard so far in budget requests or process?
I have questions.
Yeah.
So we have some what seem to be very reasonable requests. If we feel like these should be funded, what's the process for determining where those additional funds would come from? Is that the appropriations committee does all of that work?
Yeah, we can suggest.
They're not looking
things.
for us to,
They're not looking for us to do a lot of additional, so we have to be really careful about what we're asking for in addition, to increase things.
Mhm.
But yeah, they do. They'll find that.
okay, then.
So we're making recommendations.
Okay, follow-up comment then. And I believe that I don't know if we want to take any testimony beyond the agency or LURB staff. But for example, with the Climate Super Fund, they said the total was 1.2 million for the combination of the treasurer's cost assessment as well as ANR's work to determine basically who has to pay what. I've spoken with advocates who I think we'll hear from, who have suggested that ANR can wait to get their funding until after the cost assessment's been done by the treasurer. And that holding off until the next fiscal year to provide funding to ANR to do their part of it would be reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the request isn't as much but it does seem like the treasurer does need that funding, but that's not our part of the budget anyway.
No, but we've been asked to weigh in on it.
Okay.
Yeah, Bill came out of a number of committees.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is it possible, process-wise, to see sort of a full list of everything that we've heard from, all of the requests that fall into the jurisdiction of our committee to consider, and then, I know that there's three of you who are gonna sort of, maybe the three of you could make some recommendations on what of that we prioritize, or, just to process-wise, I've heard all the requests today.
Yeah.
I know you've been taking great
It's
notes.
all on the same spreadsheet.
Yeah. that-
Yeah. Well, and the final form will be a letter to appropriations where we outline all of the additional requests over the governor's recommend. So we could just draft a letter to start off with all of this stuff in it and then discuss amongst ourselves what we want to keep in the letter and.
Can be helpful to look at last year's letter
Yeah,
and then use it as a template to
it's a good idea.
figure out.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Representative Austin.
When they said there were like Act 59 and Act 181 were not funded, so they didn't have the funding for it to implement it. Wasn't there a fiscal note that went with those bills?
Yeah,
And would that have included staff and the implementation?
yeah, we can go back and see.
Okay.
That's a good idea. Yeah, well, and they need to bring us specific numbers. Part of why we chose to have the HCB do the work was they had the capacity to do the work, and we knew for sure that, you know, Bob Zeno is integral to making that happen. So Fish and Wildlife has a really important role in it, but we were aware, so that was part of the choice. Okay, so our budget team has a plan moving forward.
I guess we do need more information about the thing, those
We do need more
Act 181 and
information.
Act 59 needs.
That, right, and hopefully that's forthcoming. And something else we asked, I wanted more information on the details of that, or asked for the climate super fund.
Yes.
That's forthcoming from the secretary.
Yeah, and there's a feasibility study, I guess we can refer to as well.
That was the ANR.
I think it was both. I think it was both.
But do we have a request in to find out where the Act 59 and 181 funds were originally supposed to come from and kind of where they're going now? Maybe they're stopping it anywhere and not getting down to DFW or, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's actually a Trevor question. That's an appropriations question.
Because clearly those had to have come with some funding. That was your question, right?
Yeah.
Those mandates had to have some funding.
So when you talk to Rep Squirrel, you should be asking about that.
Also, just the technology budget, it was like a almost $500,000 line item. And I'm just not being familiar with your budget. Is that a large increase or is that?
That is agency wide, and then our appropriations committee will be diving into what's going on there. But it is a good question to follow up on.
Are we gonna hear from the treasurer's office about that piece?
It's a good question. Yeah, we should.
That would be, I'd love to hear detail about that, that
Yes,
we
we
might
need to.
prioritize in terms of funding.
Agree.
Yes.
At what point does weights and means kick in?
What, or what, in what way?
Finding sources.
Oh, yeah, well, I think that's, you know, work that out between ropes and them. Or unless you have a great idea. Pass it on. I'm always looking for money, especially for fishermen. All right, numbers.
They are looking at 10 positions unfilled or are gonna hire. Counting on excess revenues from unfilled positions.
We didn't get a number, but they said, well, Secretary Moore actually said that they thought there would be less of that this year. That's what I heard per se. But I don't think we got a number.
And then I guess my only other sort of question mark for the budget is for the LURB. They mentioned that Green Mountain Care Board has a full-time executive assistant to help them schedule all of their open meetings. And so if we can't resolve how to give them the space that they need to do their work thing, and they have to constantly be scheduling hybrid meetings for all the work that they do together, will they need more staff support?
Right.
They didn't ask for it.
Kind of they did.
They implied that it might be a good idea if they have to continue doing this open meeting stuff.
Yes,
Okay,
great.
email it, is that the best way to?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, we should head to the floor. And we're gonna do more PFAS tomorrow, but we also need to be prepared to make decisions on the budget letter. Yes, we gotta meet that deadline. Put that in your things to do bucket. See you tomorrow morning. We're adjourned.